The police called at 2:14 in the morning. "Your missing daughter has been found," the officer said. "We need someone to come down and confirm her identity." I sat in the dark with the sound of the city rain beating against the window like a warning. I told him that I only had one son, that I didn't have a daughter. The officer paused, dropping the tone of his voice an octave lower. "She has an object with your name engraved on it. Sir, please calm down or we will have to go get you." I hung up the phone with my hand trembling, not from age, but from a cold dread settling in my gut. When I walked into the precinct 40 minutes later, wet and irritated, the woman I saw behind the two-way mirror didn't just confuse me. She destroyed the reality I had been living in for 5 years. Before I tell you what I saw in that interrogation room, please hit the like button. It helps this old man tell his story. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. The rain in the city never really washes anything away. It just makes the dirt slicker. That's what I was thinking as I drove my Lincoln through the empty streets. I'm Richard Vance. For 40 years, I worked as a forensic auditor for the IRS. My job was to look at numbers and find the lies men try to hide between them. Numbers don't lie, people do. But that night, as I pulled into the precinct lot, I felt like the members of my own life weren't adding up. The station smelled like stale coffee and damp wool. Sergeant Hayes was waiting for me. I had known Hayes for a decade, ever since I helped his department track the assets of a local drug ring. He looked tired. "Richard," he said, guiding me down a hallway lit by flickering fluorescence. "I need you to brace yourself. This woman is in really bad shape." I stopped walking. "Hayes, I already told you. I have a son, Brandon. You know him. My wife, Catherine, passed away 10 years ago. We never had a daughter. Unless Brandon has a secret sister he never told me about." "You've got the wrong man." Hayes didn't argue. He just opened the door to the observation room. The room was dark. The only light came from the other side of the large glass window. "Look," he said. I stepped forward. Inside the interrogation room, a woman was sitting at a metal table. She was wrapped in a gray police blanket, shivering violently. Her hair was matted, chopped brutally short in a way that looked like a punishment, not a style. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones jutting sharply against skin that hadn't seen the sun in a long time. There was a jagged scar running down her left forearm, visible when she reached for a styrofoam cup of water. I stared at her. I analyzed her face the way I used to analyze tax returns, looking for the familiar pattern. And then she turned her head slightly. The angle of her jaw, the shape of her nose. My knees almost gave out. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. "That's impossible," I whispered. "That's Maya," Hayes said softly. "Or at least, she says she is." Maya? My heart hammered against my ribs. Maya wasn't my blood daughter. She was the woman my son Brandon was supposed to marry 5 years ago. She was the daughter I never had. The one who used to make me tea when my arthritis flared up. The one who listened to my old war stories when Brandon was too busy spending my money. But Maya was gone. 5 years ago, Brandon had come home crying. He told me Maya had left him. He said she ran off with an investor from the city. He said she stole Catherine's diamond necklace and left a cruel note saying she never loved him, that she only wanted the Vance fortune. I remembered holding my son while he wept. I remembered the anger I felt. I had trusted Maya, and she had betrayed us. I erased her from my memory. I changed my will. I let Brandon take control of more family assets to help him heal from the heartbreak. But the woman behind the glass wasn't in the city living a life of luxury. She looked like she had walked out of a grave. "Why is she here, Hayes?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "We found her wandering near the highway," Hayes said. "She was trying to stop cars. She was delirious. She kept screaming your name, not Brandon's, yours." "I need to go in there," I said. Hayes hesitated. "She's terrified, Richard. She flinches at loud noises. She might not recognize you right away." I pushed past him and opened the heavy steel door. The air inside the room was freezing. As soon as the deadbolt clicked, the woman's head snapped up. She scrambled backward in her chair, pressing her spine against the cinder block wall. Her eyes were wide, filled with a primal terror that no human being should ever have to feel. "Please," she whimpered. "I won't run again, I promise. Don't hurt me." I froze near the door. This was Maya, but it was a broken version of her. The Maya I knew was vibrant, full of laughter. This woman was a shell. "Maya," I said gently. "It's me, Richard." She stopped breathing for a second. She squinted at me, her eyes darting across my face, my coat, my hands. She was looking for a threat. She was looking for a weapon. Then, her gaze landed on my left hand. On my ring finger, I wear a heavy gold signet ring with the Vance family crest. It's old, heavy, and distinctive. Maya used to joke that it looked like something a mob boss would wear. Her eyes locked onto the ring. Her trembling slowed. She crawled out of the corner, moving slowly like a wounded animal testing the air. "Richard," she whispered. Her voice was cracked from disuse. "Yes, sweetheart, it's me." She let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She reached out a shaking hand and touched the sleeve of my coat as if testing to see if I was real. "You're alive," she said. I frowned. "Of course I'm alive. Why wouldn't I be?" She threw her head back, tears streaming down her face, washing the dirt from her cheeks. "Because he told me you were dead," she sobbed. "Brandon told me you died." The room seemed to tilt. "Brandon, my son. He said you died of a heart attack 5 years ago." She cried, the words spilling out. "He said there was no one left to help me. He said if I tried to contact anyone, the police would arrest me for stealing the necklace. He said he was the only one keeping me safe from prison." A cold fury, colder than the city rain, began to spread through my veins. I'm a man of logic. I deal in facts. And the facts were shifting violently beneath my feet. "Maya," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Brandon lied to you. I've been here the whole time. I've been waiting for you. He told me you ran away." "He lied," she said, her voice choking. "He didn't just lie, Richard. Look." She reached into the pocket of her ragged coat. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the piece of paper twice before she could hand it to me. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed, crumpled, stained with what looked like dirt and blood. I took it, adjusting my glasses. It was an obituary. "In loving memory of Richard Vance, beloved father and philanthropist. Died suddenly of cardiac arrest." I looked at the date. It was dated 1 week after Maya vanished 5 years ago. "This is fake," I said. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "He showed it to me," Maya whispered. "He brought it to the facility. He showed me your grave. He said I had no one in the world but him. And if I didn't do exactly what he said, he would stop paying for my treatments and let them throw me out on the street." "Facility?" I asked. "What facility?" "The place with the barred windows," she said, losing focus in her eyes. "The place where they give you the medicine that makes you forget your own name." I looked at the fake obituary in my hand. I looked at the scars on Maya's arms. And then I thought of my son. Brandon, who drove the sports car I bought him. Brandon, who lived in the guest wing of my mansion. Brandon, who cried on my shoulder when Maya left. All these years, I thought I was an expert at detecting fraud. I thought I could spot a lie in a ledger from a mile away. But the greatest fraud of my life had been sleeping under my own roof, eating at my table, and spending my money while keeping this girl in a living hell. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. I looked at Sergeant Hayes through the glass. He looked pale. He knew what this meant. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. This was kidnapping. This was fraud. This was torture. I turned back to Maya, took off my coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Maya," I said, "I'm taking you home. Not to Brandon, to my house. And I promise you, the man who did this to you is going to wish he was really dead." "But Richard," she grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't you understand? He has power of attorney. He showed me the papers. He said he owns you now too. He said you're losing your mind. He said you're the one who needs to be locked up." I stiffened. Power of attorney. Brandon had been pushing me to sign those papers for months. He said it was just for tax purposes to help manage the estate so I could retire comfortably. I hadn't signed them yet, or had I? I tried to remember the stack of documents he slid under my nose last week when I was tired and medicated for my back pain. A horrifying thought struck me. Brandon wasn't just hiding Maya. He was planning to do the exact same thing to me. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3 a.m. Brandon would be asleep in his wing of the house. Or maybe he wouldn't be. Maybe he was waiting for the call that the police had found a body. "Let's go," I told Hayes, who had stepped into the room. "I'm taking her." "You can't just take her, Richard. This is an active investigation." "I'm taking her," I said, my voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. "Call your captain. Tell him Richard Vance is cashing in every favor this department owes him. And Hayes, If you call my son, if you leak one word of this to anyone, I will bury this precinct in so much litigation you'll be filling out paperwork into the next century." Hayes nodded. He understood. I helped Maya to her feet. She was fragile, leaning heavily against me. As we walked out into the rain, I didn't feel the cold anymore. All I felt was the heat of the fire starting to burn in my chest. My son wanted a war. He was going to get one. He thought I was a senile old man. He forgot that before I was a father. I was the man the government sent when they wanted to destroy someone's life with a calculator and a pen. But as I opened the car door for Maya, I realized something else. Randall hadn't just created a fake obituary. He had created a narrative for the world. I was old. I was declining. If I walked into my house and accused him of kidnapping, he would spin it. He would say I was confused. He would use Maya's condition, her trauma, her instability against us. I needed a plan. I couldn't just be a father. I had to be an auditor again. I had to document the rot before I cut it out. I got into the driver's seat and looked at Maya in the rearview mirror. She was clinging to my coat like a life raft. "We're going home, Maya," I said. "But listen to me carefully. When we get there, Brandon is going to lie. He's going to yell. He might even cry. Do not say a word. Let me handle him." She nodded, her eyes wide. "Richard," she whispered. "Why did he do it? We were happy." I started the engine, the wipers slicing through the rain. That was the question, wasn't it? The numbers didn't add up. Why would a man destroy the woman he claimed to love? There was a missing variable in this equation. A hidden asset. A secret debt. And I was going to find it. As we pulled out of the station, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brandon. "Dad heard you left the house. Is everything okay? You know you shouldn't be driving at night with your vision." I looked at the screen. He was tracking me. The game had already started. I put the phone down and drove into the dark. Old Richard Vance, the grieving father, died tonight in that interrogation room. The man driving the car was someone else entirely, and he was coming for his son. The drive back to the estate was suffocatingly silent. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of the wipers fighting the storm, and the shallow, ragged breathing of the woman beside me. I kept checking the rearview mirror, looking for headlights, looking for a tail. My paranoia wasn't unfounded. If Brandon had gone to such extremes to erase Maya from existence, he wouldn't hesitate to silence an old man asking too many questions. When the iron gates of my property came into view, looming like the entrance to a fortress, I didn't feel the usual relief. I felt like I was bringing a wounded bird into a viper's den. I pulled the Lincoln into the garage, careful to park it far from where Brandon kept his sports car. I needed to get Maya inside without alerting the whole house, though at 3 a.m., the mansion remained silent and dark. I guided her through the side entrance, the one the staff used. She was shaking so violently her teeth chattered a sound that tore at my heart. Every shadow seemed to make her flinch. Mrs. Gable, my housekeeper for over 20 years, was the only one I trusted. I had called her from the car. She was waiting in the kitchen, clutching her robe, her face pale with worry. When she saw Maya, she gasped, bringing her hands to her mouth. She didn't ask questions. She didn't ask why the girl looked like a ghost, or why she smelled like damp earth and neglect. She just saw the girl she had once helped pick out wedding flowers. Mrs. Gable moved instantly, wrapping a warm blanket around Maya and guiding her toward the back guest bedroom, the one that was soundproofed for my late wife's piano practice. It was the safest place in the house. I called Dr. Evans right away. Evans was a man who owed me his career after I helped him navigate a nasty audit 10 years ago. He arrived 20 minutes later with a black medical bag and no questions. I stood by the window while he examined her, watching the rain wash the glass. My mind was racing through scenarios. When Evans came out, his face was grim. He spoke in a low voice, telling me things that made my fists clench until my knuckles turned white. Malnutrition, vitamin D deficiency so severe her bones were brittle, and the scars. He confirmed they were defensive wounds. "Someone hurt her, Richard," he said quietly, "and they did it repeatedly over a long period." He gave her a sedative to help her sleep without nightmares and promised to keep this off the official records for now. Once Evans left and Maya was in a deep, dreamless, drug-induced sleep, I went to the main living room to wait. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in my high-backed leather wind chair in the corner, cloaked in shadows, with an untouched glass of water on the side table. I needed to see him before he saw me. I needed to measure him. It was almost 4 a.m. when the roar of the sports car echoed off the driveway walls. Brandon was home. I heard the heavy front door creak open, followed by the careless jingle of keys being tossed onto the foyer table. He was humming. It was an upbeat, mindless tune that made me sick. My son was happy. He was out living the life of a wealthy heir, while the woman he claimed to love had been rotting in a cell. He stumbled slightly as he walked into the living room, fumbling for the light switch. The chandelier flared to life, flooding the room with crystal-filtered light. Brandon stood there, loosening his silk tie, his face flushed with expensive whiskey and the arrogance of a man who believes he's untouchable. He was holding a half-empty bottle of scotch in one hand. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice thick with drink. "Why are you sitting in the dark like a gargoyle?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the young man I had bailed out of trouble more times than I could count. I tried to find the monster behind those familiar blue eyes. Then he saw it. I had left Maya's ragged coat on the sofa. The gray police blanket was draped over the armrest. And on the coffee table, deliberately placed, was the necklace. The diamond necklace he claimed she had stolen. Brandon froze. His eyes darted to the coat, then to the necklace. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. The scotch bottle slipped from his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a deafening crash, shattering into jagged shards. The amber liquid splashed across the Persian rug, soaking into the fibers like a spreading stain. Brandon didn't move. He just stared at the necklace, opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water. "Where is she?" he whispered. The arrogance was gone, replaced by raw, naked panic. "She's sleeping," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the smell of alcohol. "She's in the guest room, Brandon. The police found her." For a second I thought he might pass out. He grabbed the back of the sofa to steady himself, but then I saw the transformation happen. I saw the panic harden into something else, something ugly. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He straightened up, his jaw setting into a defensive line. He was calculating. He was shifting strategies. "The police," he scoffed, his voice rising, gaining an aggressive edge. "Why did you bring her here, Dad? You should have left her at the station." "She's your fiancée, Brandon," I said, watching him closely. "She's the woman you cried over for 5 years. She's a junkie," he yelled, waving his hand toward the hallway. "Look at her stuff. Look at that filthy coat. She's an addict, Dad. I told you she ran off with some guy. She probably burned through all the cash, got hooked on drugs, and now she's back to con us out of more." He started pacing back and forth across the room, kicking the shards of glass on the floor, working himself into a frenzy. It was a performance, a loud, chaotic performance designed to overwhelm me. "She's playing you," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She knows you're soft. She knows you're old and lonely. She put on a little act, cried a few tears, and you fell for it. She's going to rob us blind while we sleep." I stayed seated, my hands resting on the arms of the chair. I noticed he wasn't looking me in the eye. He was looking at the window, at the floor, anywhere but at me. "She had scars, Brandon," I said quietly. "From needles," he shrieked. "From shooting up. God, Dad, how can you be so naive? You used to be sharp. You used to be the guy who took down cartels. Now look at you, bringing a homeless grifter into our house because you miss Mom and want to play hero." That stung. He knew exactly where to twist the knife. He was using my grief, my age, and my past against me. This was the gaslighting. He wasn't just lying. He was trying to rewrite my reality. "You need to get her out of here," he said, his voice dropping to a sinister, conspiratorial whisper. "Before she hurts you. Before she accuses us of something crazy to get a payout." I looked at him. Really looked at him. If I pushed him too hard right now, if I accused him of the kidnapping, he would snap. He might do something desperate. He might have a gun, or worse. He might use his power of attorney to have me committed before the sun came up. I needed him to think he still had control. I needed him to think I was the confused, frail old man he wanted me to be. I let my shoulders slump. I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes, feigning exhaustion. "Maybe you're right," I muttered, making my voice sound weak. She seemed confused. She was saying strange things. Brandon stopped pacing. He pounced on my weakness instantly. "See, I told you," he said, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 minutes. "She's mentally unstable, Dad. It's sad, really. But we can't help her. We aren't a rehab center. I sighed, looking at the spilled scotch. I just thought after all this time. It's the dementia talking, Dad, he said, his tone shifting to a fake sugary concern that made my stomach turn. He walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. His palm was damp and cold. You haven't been taking your memory meds, have you? You're confusing the past with the present. You're seeing what you want to see. I forced myself not to recoil from his touch. I nodded slowly. Maybe I am. I'm very tired, Brandon. Of course you are, he soothed, squeezing my shoulder a little too hard. Look, go to bed. Take your pills. I'll handle this. I'll call a specialized facility in the morning. A nice place. They'll come pick her up, get her the help she needs. You won't even have to see her. He was trying to get rid of the evidence. He wanted to send her back to the hell she had escaped from before she could talk to anyone else. All right, I whispered. You handle it. I can't deal with the stress. My heart. Good, he said. Smart move, Dad. Go get some sleep. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on the armrest like an invalid. I shuffled toward the stairs, keeping my head down. Brandon watched me go. I could feel his eyes drilling into my back, assessing if his manipulation had worked. When I reached the stair landing, I paused. I was in the shadows now, out of his direct line of sight. I turned just enough to look back into the living room. Brandon wasn't cleaning up the glass. He wasn't pouring himself another drink. He was standing in the middle of the room with his phone in his hand. The arrogance was gone. The fake concern was gone. He was typing furiously, his thumbs a blur across the screen. And his hands, the hands that had just patted my shoulder with such condescending assurance, were shaking uncontrollably. He wasn't sending triumphant texts to a buddy. He was terrified. He was sending an SOS. I saw him bring the phone to his ear, his posture hunched, his voice a frantic whisper that barely carried up the stairs. She's here, I heard him hiss into the phone. The old man brought her here. No, he bought it. He thinks she's a junkie. But we have a problem. She has the necklace. We need to move the timeline up. Tomorrow. Yes, both of them. My blood ran cold. Both of them. He wasn't just planning to send Maya away. He was planning to get rid of me too. I turned and walked silently down the hall to my bedroom. I didn't take my memory pills. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand and slid the false bottom aside. Beneath it lay my old service revolver and a digital voice recorder. Brandon thought he was managing a senile father. He didn't realize he had just declared war on the only man who knew exactly how to bury him. I checked the cylinder of the revolver. It was loaded. If you wanted to move the timeline up, I would be ready. But first, I needed to know who was on the other end of that phone call. I needed to know who we were. As I sat on the edge of my bed waiting for the sun to come up, I realized the enemy wasn't just inside the gates. The enemy was sleeping down the hall, and he had invited the wolves to dinner. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like hours, the weight of the old service revolver heavy in my hand, a cold comfort against the storm raging outside, and the storm brewing under my own roof. The silence of the house wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a crime scene before the tape goes up. I was waiting for the sun to rise, but before the light could break through the gray city clouds, a soft knock on my door pulled me from my dark thoughts. It was Dr. Evans. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped in, closing the door softly behind him, his face looking older and more haggard than when he arrived. He was holding a tablet in his hand, the blue light illuminating the deep, worry lines etched into his forehead. Richard, he said, his voice low and stripped of any medical detachment. We need to talk about what I found in Maya's blood. I put the revolver back in the drawer, sliding the false bottom into place. I motioned for him to speak. I was waiting for him to tell me she was an addict, just like Brandon had screamed in the living room. I was braced to hear she had fallen victim to heroin or meth. The tragic story of a girl who couldn't handle the pressure. But Evans shook his head before I could even ask. She's not an addict, Richard. He sat sitting in the armchair across from me. I ran a full talk screen. There were no recreational drugs in her system, no opiates, no amphetamines. Nothing to suggest she's been living on the streets getting high. I felt a flash of hope, followed immediately by a wave of confusion. Then why was she shaking? Why did she look like she was going through withdrawal? Because she is going through withdrawal, Evans said, tapping the screen of his tablet. But not from street drugs. Her blood is saturated with thorazine. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. I knew what thorazine was. It was an old-school antipsychotic, a chemical straitjacket used to sedate violent patients in mental institutions decades ago. It wasn't something a young woman took for anxiety. It was something used to turn a person into a zombie. The levels in her blood are dangerous. Evans continued, his voice tightening. Someone has been keeping her heavily sedated for a long time, probably years. The tremors, the confusion, the light sensitivity. Those are all side effects of long-term exposure to high doses. She wasn't on the run, Richard. She was being kept in a chemical coma. I felt the bile rise in my throat. My son had stood in my living room and called her a junkie. He had used her condition, a condition he inflicted on her to discredit her. But Evans wasn't finished. There's more, he said, and I saw him hesitate, searching for the right words. When I examined her torso, I found evidence of multiple fractures. Her ribs have been broken, Richard, at least 3 times over the last 5 years. They healed poorly, which means she never got proper medical attention for them. And the angle of the breaks, these weren't from falling down the stairs or a car accident. These were direct impacts. He didn't have to say the word. I knew what he meant. Someone had beaten her. Someone had kicked her or punched her while she was defenseless. The image of Brandon's polished Italian leather shoes flashed in my mind, and I had to close my eyes to stop the room from spinning. "Can she talk?" I asked, my voice sounding like grinding stones. "She's awake," Evan said. "The sedative I gave her earlier was mild, just enough to counteract the withdrawal symptoms. She's asking for you, but Richard, be careful. She's fragile. Her reality has been warped." I walked down the hall to the guest bedroom, my legs feeling heavy like I was wading through wet cement. When I walked into the room, the only light came from the bedside lamp. Maya was sitting up, clutching the duvet to her chin. She looked small, broken, but her eyes were clear. The chemical fog was lifting, revealing the terrified woman underneath. I pulled a chair up to the bed and sat down. I didn't try to touch her. I just let her see me. I let her see that I was real. "He said you were dead," she whispered again, as if she needed to hear me deny it one more time. "I'm here, Maya," I said softly. "I'm alive, and you're safe. Brandon can't hurt you here." At the mention of his name, she flinched so hard the bed frame rattled. She took a ragged breath, her eyes darting toward the door. "I didn't run away, Richard," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "You have to believe me. I didn't steal the necklace. I didn't steal anything." "I know," I said. "I know the truth now. But I need you to tell me how this happened. I need to understand the numbers, Maya. I need the logic." She closed her eyes and a tear escaped, tracing a path through the dirt on her cheek. "It started with a ledger," she said. "The red leather one he kept in his safe. He thought I didn't know the combination, but I saw him open it once." I leaned forward. A ledger. Brandon was terrible at math. He hated paperwork. "I opened it one afternoon when he was at the club," she continued. "I saw the transfers, Richard. He wasn't investing in startups. He was funneling money out of your company accounts. He was moving it to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Millions of dollars. He was faking vendor invoices." My heart stopped. I was a forensic auditor. I had spent 40 years catching men who did exactly that. And while I was out catching strangers, my own son was robbing me blind right under my nose. I had been so deep in grief over Catherine's death that I let him handle the daily operations. I had signed the checks he put in front of me without looking. I had trusted him. "I was going to tell you," Maya said, her voice breaking. "That night, the night I disappeared, I told him I knew. I told him I was going to show you the ledger." He cried. He begged me not to destroy the family. He said he would put the money back. He said we should go for a drive to dinner to talk about it calmly. She opened her eyes and the horror in them was absolute. "He gave me a bottle of water in the car," she whispered. "It tasted bitter. The last thing I remember is the car swerving and him smiling. When I woke up, I was in a wide room with bars on the window. A man in a white coat came in. He told me I had been in a terrible accident. He said I had a psychotic break and tried to kill Brandon. He said you were so angry, you paid to have me locked away forever." I gripped the arms of my chair so hard, the leather creaked. It was a perfect lie. He had staged an accident to account for any injuries and then drugged her to simulate psychosis. They gave me shots every day, pills. If I refused, they tied me down. If I asked for a phone, they hit me. They told me I was crazy. After a while, I started to believe them. I started to forget who I was. I only remembered you. I held on to the memory of you like a lifeline. But then Brandon came and showed me your obituary. She buried her face in her hands. That's when I broke, Richard. When I thought you were gone, I stopped fighting. I just wanted to die. I sat there listening to the destruction of a human soul and realized with a sickening jolt that I had funded it. I remembered the monthly payments Brandon had me authorize. $10,000 a month to the Green Valley Care Foundation. He told me it was a charity for veterans. I had signed those checks with pride, thinking I was helping heroes. Instead, I was paying the salaries of the guards who beat my daughter-in-law. I was paying for the Thorazine that erased her mind. The shame was hotter than the rage. I was supposed to be the protector of this family. I was supposed to be the smart one. But I had been played for a fool by a boy who couldn't even balance a checkbook without cheating. I stood up, my knees popping. I reached out and gently placed my hand on her head. Her hair was coarse, damaged by malnutrition, but she leaned into my touch. You found the fraud, Maya. I said, my voice steady and cold as a glacier. You were the auditor that night. You did your job. Now I'm going to do mine. I walked to the window and looked down at the driveway. The rain was tapering off, leaving behind a thick gray fog that clung to the trees. The world looked colorless and dead. Suddenly, a pair of headlights cut through the mist. I stiffened. It was 4:30 in the morning. There were no delivery trucks, no guests. A sleek black SUV rolled slowly up the long driveway, its tires crunching on the wet gravel. It didn't park near the garage. It stopped right in front of the main entrance, aggressive and entitled. I watched as the driver's side door opened. A woman stepped out. She was dressed in a sharp beige trench coat. Her blonde hair pulled back into a perfect, severe bun. Even from this distance, I could see the flash of the massive diamond on her finger. A diamond likely bought with the stolen money from my accounts. It was Tiffany, Brandon's fiancée, the woman who had smiled at me over dinner last night, calling me dad and pouring my tea. She didn't look like a nervous fiancée checking on her future father-in-law. She moved with the predatory grace of a shark entering the water. She walked to the trunk of the SUV and popped it open. I watched her pull out a large black medical case. It wasn't a doctor's bag. It looked like the kind of kit used for restraints. She looked up at the house, her eyes scanning the windows. For a second, her gaze locked onto the guest room window where I was standing. She couldn't see me in the dark, but I could see her. Her face was set in a mask of grim determination. Brandon hadn't called the facility. He had called her, and she hadn't come to talk. I turned back to Dr. Evans, who was packing up his bag. Doctor, I said, don't leave. He looked at me confused. Richard, we have company, I said, checking the load in my revolver one last time. And I have a feeling they aren't here for a social call. Take Maya into the bathroom and lock the door. Do not open it unless you hear my voice. Evans saw the gun. His eyes went wide, but he nodded. He understood that the audit had begun, and the first item on the checklist was survival. I stepped out of the room and closed the door. I walked to the top of the grand staircase and waited in the shadows. The front doorbell didn't ring. Instead, I heard the distinctive beep of the electronic keypad. She had the code. Of course she had the code. The heavy front door swung open. Tiffany stepped into the foyer, shaking the rain from her umbrella. Brandon came jogging from the living room, looking disheveled and frantic. Did you bring it? He hissed, his voice echoing up to where I stood. I have the kit, she said, her voice calm, professional, and chillingly devoid of empathy. He's asleep. The old man is upstairs, Brandon said. He thinks she's a junkie. He's weak, Tiff. We can do this quick. One injection for her to knock her out, and we take her back to the facility. And for him. Tiffany smiled, a cold, thin expression that made my blood freeze. For him, we used the heart medication overdose, she said. It'll look like a tragic accident. The shock of the intruder caused a cardiac arrest. The coroner won't even blink. I stood in the dark watching the two people planning my murder. They thought I was a weak old man sleeping in his bed. They didn't know that the man at the top of the stairs wasn't Richard the father. It was Richard the auditor. And I was about to close their accounts permanently. I wasn't in the hallway. I was right outside the door. I froze. I was trapped. The only way out was the window, and we were on the second floor. I quickly shoved the folder back onto the credenza, but in my haste, I knocked over a small framed photo of Brandon and me from a fishing trip 10 years ago. It hit the desk with a loud clatter. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the door was pushed open. Brandon stood there. He wasn't smiling. He was no longer playing the concerned son. He looked at me standing in his office in my socks, surrounded by his financial secrets. He looked at the folder that was slightly askew. He looked at the phone in my hand. His face changed. The mask dropped completely, revealing something feral and terrified. "Dad," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What are you doing in here?" I tried to hide the phone behind my back, but it was too late. He saw the glow of the screen. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot. "I was looking for a pen," I stammered, trying to summon the act of the confused old man one last time. "My pen ran out of ink and I—" "Stop," Brandon hissed. He took a step toward me. He looked at the open folder. He looked at the Green Valley brochure peeking out from between the pages. "You aren't looking for a pen," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You're snooping. You were listening, weren't you?" I straightened my back. The act was over. There was no point in pretending to be senile when the predator had already smelled blood. "I wasn't snooping, Brandon," I said, my voice losing the tremor and returning to the steel-edged tone I used in federal court. "I was auditing. And you're in the red." Brandon flinched at the change in my voice. He looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger. But then desperation took over. He looked at the heavy brass trophy on his desk. A participation trophy from a golf tournament. His hand twitched toward it. "Give me the phone, Dad," he said, holding out a shaking hand. "Give it to me now, and maybe Chief won't have to use the needle." I didn't move. I didn't hand over the phone. I tightened my grip on it. "You think you can intimidate me?" I asked. "I stared down cartel bosses before you were born. You're just a boy playing dress-up with a man's crimes." Brandon lunged. He didn't go for the phone. He went for my throat. The split second before Brandon's hands reached my neck, I made a decision that was harder than any physical fight I had ever endured. I decided to die. Not literally, but I decided to kill Richard the auditor, the sharp-witted father who demanded respect, and replace him with Richard the invalid, the husk of a man whose mind had rotted away. I let my knees give out. I didn't wait for him to tackle me. I slumped against the door frame, letting the phone slip from my fingers and clatter onto the hardwood floor. As Brandon grabbed my lapels, his face twisted in a rictus of rage. I didn't fight back. I didn't glare at him with fury. I let my jaw go slack. I let my eyes lose focus, staring not at him, but through him at a spot on the wall behind his left shoulder. "Robert!" he gasped, my voice trembling with manufactured confusion. "Robert, why are you yelling? You're going to wake Catherine. She just put the baby down." Brandon froze. His grip on my shirt loosened just a fraction. He stared at me, his chest heaving, searching my face for the defiance he had seen just moments ago. But I gave him nothing. I gave him the vacant, watery stare of a man lost in a timeline that no longer existed. Robert was my younger brother. He had died in the war in 1968. And Catherine, my wife, had been in the ground for a decade. "Who are you talking to, Dad?" Brandon whispered, the adrenaline in his voice giving way to uncertainty. I raised my hand and patted his cheek with shaking fingers. "Robert, stop playing. We have to go. The game starts at 6. Did you bring the tickets?" Brandon recoiled, as if he had been burned. He looked at the phone on the floor, then back at me. The monster who had been ready to strangle his own father retreated, replaced by the arrogant, dismissive boy I had raised. He left. It was a short, sharp bark of laughter, full of relief and cruel amusement. He picked up my phone and slipped it into his pocket. "He's gone, Tiff," Brandon yelled, turning his head toward the hallway where Tiffany was lurking. "The old man is completely gone. He thinks I'm his dead brother." Tiffany walked into the room, her eyes narrowing as she assessed me. She walked over and waved a hand in front of my face. I didn't blink. I kept smiling at the invisible ghost of my brother. "See?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I told you, the stress triggered the collapse. He's harmless, Brandon. He's just a vegetable waiting to be planted in the garden." Brandon smirked, adjusting his jacket. He looked down at me with a mix of pity and disgust that made my stomach turn. "Well, that makes things easier. Get up, Dad. Or Robert, or whoever you think you are. Go to your room. I let them lead me to my bedroom like a toddler. I shuffled my feet. I mumbled about baseball tickets and Catherine's meatloaf. But inside, behind the vacant expression, my mind was racing at the speed of a supercomputer. I was cataloging every word, every touch, every insult. They thought they had neutralized me. They didn't realize they had just handed me the ultimate camouflage. The next 12 hours were a masterclass in cruelty. Once Brandon and Tiffany believed I was no longer a person, but an object, they stopped hiding their true nature. The mask of civility didn't just slip, it was thrown into the fire. The next morning, I wasn't woken up by the smell of coffee and Mrs. Gable's gentle knock, but by the door banging open. Brandon walked in, followed by the smell of bacon and fresh coffee that wasn't for me. He was holding a plastic tray with a bowl of cold gray oatmeal and a glass of tap water. "Breakfast time for the invalid," he announced, dropping the tray onto the nightstand with a dull thud that spilled water over my books. "Eat up. We need you strong for the lawyer later." I sat up, blinking rapidly. "Where is Mrs. Gable?" I asked, keeping my voice thin and reedy. "She usually makes the eggs." "Mrs. Gable is busy packing," Tiffany said, appearing in the doorway. She was wearing one of Catherine's silk robes. Seeing it on her body felt like a physical blow. "We're letting the staff go, Richard. We don't need them anymore. We're cutting costs." They weren't just cutting costs, they were eliminating witnesses. Mrs. Gable was the only person in the house who would have fought for me. I ate the cold oatmeal, forcing spoonfuls down, swallowing my pride with the lumps. I needed the calories. I needed the energy. From my room, I could hear the sounds of the house shifting. I heard heavy footsteps going to the guest room down the hall. I heard Maya's voice, high and terrified, followed by the sound of a lock clicking. She had been imprisoned. Brandon had moved her from the guest suite to the small storage closet at the end of the hall, the one with no windows. I heard him yelling at her through the door. "You stay in there and keep your mouth shut," he barked. "If I hear a single peep, the next injection won't be a sedative. It'll be permanent." I sat in my chair by the window, rocking back and forth, muttering to myself whenever anyone walked by. But my eyes were watching the driveway. My ears were tracking their movements. Brandon spent the morning on the phone liquidating assets. I heard him selling off the vintage car collection. I heard him discussing the sale of the lake house. He was stripping the carcass of my life before I was even dead. But his biggest mistake was assuming a 73-year-old man didn't understand technology. He had taken my smartphone. He had cut the landline. He had disabled the Wi-Fi on my main computer, but he didn't know about the burner phone. Years ago, during a particularly high-stakes audit of a mob-run construction firm, I'd kept a secure, encrypted satellite phone hidden in the spine of a hollowed-out tax law encyclopedia in my study. When I pretended to be looking for a pen last night, I hadn't just been snooping. I had verified the book was still there. That afternoon, while Brandon and Tiffany were arguing in the living room about how to split the proceeds from the sale of my mother's jewelry, I made my move. I asked to use the bathroom. I shuffled down the hall, leaning on the wall, dragging my feet. I didn't go to the bathroom. I slipped into the study. I had 3 minutes before they noticed. I pulled the book from the shelf. The phone was there, its battery dormant, but holding a charge. I turned it on. The screen glowed with a faint blue light. I didn't call the police. The local police were slow, and Brandon might have friends there. I went higher. I opened the secure email client I hadn't used in 5 years. I typed in Agent Miller's address, a man who was now a senior director in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We had worked a massive case together. He owed me one. Subject: Project Icarus. Code red. Body: Brandon Vance. Identity theft, elder abuse, kidnapping, massive embezzlement. He's liquidating the estate. I'm being held against my will under false medical pretenses. He has a hostage. I have proof of wire fraud to offshore accounts. Do not call the house. They will kill us. Send a team with a federal warrant. I am buying time. I hit send. I deleted the sent mail. I turned the phone off and shoved it back into the book. I made it to the bathroom and flushed the toilet just as Brandon banged on the door. "What are you doing in there, old man?" he yelled. "Don't die on the toilet. It's a cliché." I opened the door, looking down at my feet. "I couldn't find the light switch," I mumbled. Brandon grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. "Come on, get dressed. The lawyer is here. It's time to sign the papers." He dragged me to the living room. The air was thick with tension. A man I didn't recognize was at the dining table. He was young, slick, with a suit that cost more than his car and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This wasn't our family attorney. This was a shark Brandon had hired to gut me. Tiffany was there, pouring scotch. She smiled at me, a predator looking at a wounded deer. "Here he is," she cooed. "Richard, this is Attorney Sloan. He's here to help you manage things." "Since you're having so much trouble remembering everything." Attorney Sloan opened a leather portfolio, sliding a stack of documents toward me. "Mr. Vance?" he said, his voice as smooth as oil. "These are standard durable power of attorney forms and a property deed transfer. Brandon tells me you want to retire to a specialized facility where you can get the care you need. This just authorizes him to handle the finances while you rest." I looked at the papers. They were a death sentence. Once I signed these, Brandon could legally throw me in the cheapest hole he could find and burn through $40 million in a year. I looked at the pen Sloan was holding out to me. "Sign it, Dad." Brandon said, his voice low. "Don't make a scene. Robert isn't here to save you." I took the pen. My hand was shaking. This time the tremor wasn't an act. Adrenaline was coursing through me. I needed to buy time. The FBI needed time. If I signed now, I lost. If I refused, they might force me, or worse, use the medical kit Tiffany brought. I looked at the paper. I looked at Brandon. "I don't have my glasses," I whispered. "I can't read it." "You don't need to read it," Brandon snapped. "I read it for you. Just sign on the line." "I can't sign what I can't see," I said, raising my voice just a fraction, letting a hint of stubbornness bleed through the dementia act. Catherine always said, "Never sign what you can't see." Brandon slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! Just sign the damn paper!" He grabbed my hand and forced the pen onto the paper. The nib dug into the document. Suddenly the doorbell rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It was a long, insistent press. Brandon froze. Tiffany looked at the door. Attorney Sloan looked nervous. "Who is that, Brandon? Maybe it's the movers," Tiffany whispered. Brandon glared at me. "You stay here. Don't say a word." He walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and his shoulders relaxed. "It's just the courier," he said. "I ordered champagne." He unlocked the deadbolt and yanked the door open, but it wasn't the courier. Standing on the porch wasn't a delivery boy with champagne. It was a man in a gray suit holding a briefcase flanked by 2 uniformed officers. But it wasn't the FBI. It was worse. It was Harrison Pierce, my personal estate lawyer for 30 years, the man who held the original copy of my will, the man Brandon thought had retired to Florida. "Mister?" Vance, Harrison said, his voice booming through the foyer. "I received an urgent notification that there was an attempt to alter the estate trust. I am here to remind your son that under the terms of the irrevocable trust you established 10 years ago, no changes can be made without a competency hearing conducted by 3 independent board-certified psychiatrists." Brandon's face went pale. He tried to slam the door, but one of the officers caught it. "You have no business here, Harrison," Brandon yelled. "My father is sick. He's incompetent." "Then let's ask him," Harrison said, pushing past Brandon into the room. He looked at me. He saw the bruise on my arm where Brandon had grabbed me. He saw the terror in my eyes that I finally allowed to show. "Richard," Harrison asked, "do you know who I am?" I looked at Brandon. I looked at Tiffany. I looked at the shark lawyer who was hastily packing his briefcase. The act was nearing its end, but I wasn't ready to drop the curtain just yet. I needed to get Maya out before the shooting started. "Who is he, Dad?" Brandon warned his eyes, promising pain if I answered correctly. I looked at Harrison. I blinked. Are you the doctor?" I asked. Brandon exhaled. He smirked. "See? He doesn't even know you." Harrison frowned. He looked at me closely. He saw my hands tapping a rhythm on the table. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Morse code. SOS. Harrison's eyes widened. He had been a radio operator in the Navy. He knew. "I see," Harrison said, turning slowly to Brandon. "Well, if he is ill, then he certainly cannot sign legal documents today. I'm afraid this meeting is over." "And Brandon," he spat, "I will be filing an emergency motion to freeze all assets pending that competency hearing. No one spends a dime Not even for champagne. Brandon looked like he was going to explode. The trap hadn't snapped shut yet, but the noose was tightening. And as Harrison walked out, leaving me alone with the wolves again, I knew the night was going to be long. And I knew Brandon was done playing games. If you think Brandon is going to let a piece of paper stop him from getting what he wants, you're wrong. What happens next isn't a legal battle. It's a hunt. Subscribe to see how I survived the night with a son who has nothing left to lose. The door clicked shut behind Harrison Pierce, leaving a silence in the room that was heavier than the storm outside. My attempt to alert him had worked, but it had also accelerated the timeline. Brandon was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, his face flushed with a mix of panic and rage. He knew he had hours, maybe less, before Harrison filed that motion to freeze the assets. If he wanted control of the $40 million, he needed my signature on that power of attorney immediately. The lawyer. Attorney Sloan was wiping sweat from his upper lip, his eyes darting between me and the angry young man who was promising him a massive payout. Brandon slammed his hand onto the mahogany dining table, rattling the crystal chandelier. "We don't have time for games," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Sloan, give him the pen. If he doesn't sign, we hold his hand and make him sign." I sat there shrinking into the chair, making myself look as small and pathetic as possible. I let my mouth hang slightly open, my eyes wandering the room with feigned confusion. I was channeling every ounce of frailty I had seen in the nursing homes I used to audit. Inside, however, my heart was beating with the steady rhythmic precision of a war drum. Sloan slid the document in front of me again. It was a thick stack of legal-sized paper, dense with jargon that stripped me of my rights. It gave Brandon the power to sell my property, access my accounts, make medical decisions, and even determine where I lived. It was a document that turned a person into a ghost. "Sign it, Mr. Vance," Sloan urged, pushing a heavy gold-plated Mont Blanc pen toward me. Right there on the line next to the X, I reached out a trembling hand. I stared at the pen as if it were a foreign object. I allowed my clumsy fingers to miss it. When Sloan tried to press it into my palm, I jerked my hand in a sudden violent spasm. The expensive pen slipped from his grip, hit the edge of the table, and rolled underneath the heavy oak sideboard against the wall. Brandon groaned, throwing his head back in frustration. "Clumsy old man," he muttered. "Get it, Sloan." Sloan sighed, pushing his chair back to get on his hands and knees. "No," I whispered, my voice raspy. "I have my own pen. Catherine gave it to me. I only sign with Catherine's pen." I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the Parker fountain pen I had kept there for 30 years. It looked like an ordinary battered writing instrument, the kind you might find in a pawn shop for $10. But it wasn't ordinary. In 1990, I helped the FBI take down a con artist named Silas the Inkwell. He was a forger who used a special chemical mixture in his ink. It was a compound that looked bold and permanent when wet, indistinguishable from standard black ink. But upon exposure to oxygen, the chemical bonds would begin to break down. In 4 hours, the ink would fade to a faint gray. In 12 hours, it would disappear completely, leaving the paper pristine and blank. I had kept the bottle of that confiscated ink as a trophy. Last night, before I went to bed, I had emptied my Parker and refilled it with the last of Silas's supply. I pulled the pen out, clutching it with both hands as if it were a holy relic. "Can I use this one?" I asked, looking up at Brandon with wide, watery eyes. Brandon didn't even look at the pen. He just wanted the ink on the page. "Use whatever you want," he snapped impatiently. "Just sign your name, old man." I leaned over the document. I felt the nib of the pen touch the paper. This was the moment. If the ink had degraded over the years, if it came out gray or invisible, the game was over. They would know. I pressed hard. A thick, dark line of black ink flowed onto the paper. It was perfect. I began to write. Rick Ard. I wrote slowly, agonizingly slowly, letting the tremor in my hand distort the letters, just enough to look like the signature of a man in decline, but legible enough to pass legal scrutiny. Brandon leaned over my shoulder, his hot breath hitting my neck. "That's it," he whispered, greed dripping from his voice. "Keep going, Vanky." I finished the signature, lifting the pen. The black ink glistened on the white page, sealing my fate. Or so they thought. Attorney Sloan snatched the paper before the ink was even dry. He inspected it, blew on it, and then smiled. "It's valid," Sloan announced. "The signature is shaky, but it matches the ID. Legally, Mr. Vance, you have just transferred full control of your estate to your son. Brandon let out a cry of triumph that was primal and terrifying. He grabbed the champagne bottle he had ordered, popping the cork with a violence that sprayed foam over the Persian rug. My rug. He didn't even bother with glasses. He took a swig straight from the bottle, letting the liquid spill down his chin. "We did it!" Tiffany yelled toward the kitchen. "It's done! I own everything!" Tiffany appeared, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked at the document, her eyes gleaming with ambition. "Finally," she said. I sat there clutching my pen, watching him celebrate my ruin. I hoped they would keep up the charade a little longer, at least until they got me out of the house. But the ink on the page seemed to dissolve their masks right along with my rights. Brandon turned to me. His face was no longer that of a son or even a concerned relative. It was the face of a landlord evicting a tenant he despised. "Get up," he said, his voice flat and cold. "I'm tired, Brandon," I mumbled. "Can I go to my room?" "You don't have a room anymore," he said, taking another swig. "That's the master suite. And starting tonight, Tiff and I are moving in there. You can sleep in the utility room in the basement until the van comes for you on Monday." The basement. It was damp, unfinished, and freezing. He wasn't just taking my money. He was stripping away my dignity layer by layer. Tiffany let out a laugh, a sharp, brittle sound. "Don't be cruel, Brandon. Let him pack his little trinkets first. We don't want his junk cluttering up the house when the real estate agents come next week." Brandon nodded. "You're right." "Hey!" he yelled down the hall, calling the 2 hired thugs he had brought in to replace Mrs. Gable. They looked more like nightclub bouncers than movers. "Take the old man to his room," Brandon ordered, pointing at me with the champagne bottle. "Give him 2 boxes. Anything that doesn't fit in 2 boxes goes in the trash. And start clearing out the library. I want all those dusty old books out of here by tomorrow. We need to set that room up as a media center." My library. 40 years of collecting rare tax law volumes, first editions of classic literature, and the journals I had written during my biggest cases. He was going to throw them into a dumpster to make room for a TV. I stood up, letting the guards grab my arms. I didn't resist. I let them drag me toward the hallway, but as we passed the fireplace in the living room, Brandon stopped. "Wait," he said. He walked over to the mantel. Resting there in a silver frame was the last photo I had of Catherine and me together. It was taken on our 40th anniversary, just a month before she died. We were laughing, holding hands on the deck of a cruise ship. It was the anchor of my memory. Brandon picked it up. He looked at it with a sneer. "You know," he said, looking at me, "Mom always loved you more. She always said you were so smart, so principled. She used to tell me, 'Brandon, why can't you be more like your father?'" He popped open the back of the frame and pulled the photograph out. "Well, look at you now, Dad," he spat. "You're a vegetable signing your life away to the son you thought was a failure." Mom was wrong. You aren't smart. You're just old. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold lighter. He flipped it open with a metallic clink. The flame danced in the drafty room. "No," I whispered, breaking character for just a fraction of a second. "Please, not that one." Brandon smirked. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed inflicting pain. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. He held a corner of the photograph over the flame. I watched as the fire caught the glossy paper. I watched the image of Catherine's face curl and blacken. I watched the flames eat their way toward my own smiling face in the photo. He held it until the heat almost touched his fingers. Then he dropped the burning remains into the ashes of the fireplace. He turned his back on me. "Get him out of my sight." The guards dragged me down the hall. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. As I was pulled away, I looked back one last time at the dining table. The document lay there open. The signature was black and bold. But in my mind, I was counting. 10 minutes had passed. The chemical reaction had already begun. The bonds were breaking. While Brandon burned my past, the future he thought he had stolen was evaporating right in front of him. I let them throw me into my bedroom. I let them toss 2 cardboard boxes onto the floor. I heard them laughing at the end of the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the clock. 4 hours. In 4 hours, that document would be a blank piece of paper. And when the sun came up on Monday and the van came to take me to Green Valley, Brandon would try to flash his authority and find nothing but a ghost. But I wasn't going to wait until Monday. I looked up at the air vent in the ceiling. It connected to the basement. And from the basement, There was a coal chute that led to the garden. It was narrow, filthy, and dangerous for a man my age. I took off my cardigan. I rolled up my sleeves. The time for acting was over. The time for the audit had ended. Now it was time for the liquidation. I checked my watch. 8 p.m. By midnight, the ink would be invisible. By midnight, I needed to be out of this room, have Maya out of her cell, and be gone before Brandon realized his $40 million ticket had just expired. I grabbed the heavy brass lamp from the nightstand. I wasn't going to back. I was going to break out. The celebration downstairs was loud and vulgar. I could hear the bass of the stereo thumping through the floorboards, vibrating against the soles of my shoes. Brandon and Tiffany were toasting their victory, drinking vintage champagne I had been saving for my 75th birthday. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was locked in his room crying over his lost dignity, waiting to be shipped off to a warehouse for the dying. They didn't know that while they were clinking glasses, I was conducting the most important audit of my career. I sat on the floor of the closet, the only place where the light from my satellite device wouldn't be visible from the hallway. The screen was small, but it was a window into my son's soul. I needed to know why. That was the question that had been eating at me since I saw Maya behind the glass at the police station. Greed is a powerful motivator, yes, but Brandon was lazy. Orchestrating a fake death, kidnapping a woman, and committing elaborate fraud required a desperation that simple greed doesn't provide. There was a wolf at the door, and I needed to see its teeth. I navigated to the cloud server of Brandon's consulting firm. It was a shell company, I already knew that, but even shell companies leave digital fingerprints. The login screen blinked at me, mocking my attempts. But Brandon was my son. I knew him better than he knew himself. He was a creature of habit and sentimentality, even if he denied the latter. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried his social security number. Incorrect. Then I typed in the one date he claimed to have forgotten when he burned that photograph. July 14th, 1952. Catherine's birthday. Access granted. The irony was bitter on my tongue. He used the birthday of the woman he had just disrespected to protect the secrets that were destroying her legacy. The files opened, and I began to dig. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the cancer. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't women. It was the oldest vice in the book. Gambling. But not the kind of gambling where you fly to Vegas and play blackjack at a high roller table. This was darker. Brandon was addicted to unregulated offshore crypto casinos. The transaction history was a bloody trail of losses. I scrolled through the spreadsheet, my eyes widening. $50,000 lost on a virtual roulette wheel in 10 minutes. $300,000 vanished into a sports betting algorithm in a single afternoon. He wasn't just losing money. He was setting it on fire. He had burned through his trust fund in 6 months. Then he had burned through the company accounts. Then he had started borrowing. I found a folder labeled Urgent. Inside were emails from a sender known only as Apex Investments. The language wasn't corporate. It was street language dressed up in thin threats. Mr. Vance, your extension has expired. Principal plus interest is due. You now have until Monday morning. If the funds are not in the escrow account, we will collect in person. And we do not accept excuses. I looked at the total amount due, $5 million. I leaned back against the wall, the cold plaster seeping through my shirt. $5 million. That's why he needed to sell the house immediately. That's why he needed the power of attorney signed tonight. That's why he needed me to disappear. He wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to stay alive. The house was his ransom payment. He had leveraged my life to save his own skin from loan sharks, who probably threatened to break his legs or worse. But in the financial world, debt is a commodity. It can be bought, sold, and traded. And Brandon had forgotten who his father was. I wasn't just a retired accountant. I was a man who had spent 40 years building relationships with the kind of people who clean up messes for the government. I opened a secure browser. I logged into a dormant account I managed under the name of a shell corporation I set up years ago for undercover stings. Atlas Recoveries. It held a substantial reserve of private funds I had tucked away for a rainy day. Well, it was pouring in the city tonight. I traced the email address of Apex Investments. It didn't take long to find his broker. These predatory lenders are always looking for a quick payout. They knew Brandon was a liability. They knew he was drowning. If someone offered them a guaranteed cash buyout, even at a discount, they'd take it just to get the liability off their books. I drafted a message. This is Atlas Recoveries. We represent a private equity interest. We are aware of the distressed asset regarding Brandon Vance. We offer a $3 million cash settlement to purchase the debt in full. Immediate wire. Take it or wait for a man who is about to be arrested for fraud. I hit send. It was a gamble, but I knew these people. They preferred $3 million in hard cash tonight over $5 million in promises from a desperate addict next week. I waited. The music downstairs got louder. I heard Tiffany laugh, a shrill sound that grated on my nerves. They were celebrating a victory that was already turning to ash. 5 minutes later, the reply came. Deal. Wire instructions attached. I didn't hesitate. I authorized the transfer from my secret offshore account. It was a significant chunk of my liquid savings, money I had planned to leave Brandon in my will. In a way, he was getting his inheritance early, just not the way he expected. A moment later, the confirmation flashed on the screen. Transaction complete. Debt title transferred. I closed the laptop and let out a long, slow breath. The dynamic of the house had just shifted, even if no one downstairs knew it yet. I was no longer just the victim. I was no longer just the father. I was the creditor. I owned his debt. I owned the threat hanging over his head. Brandon didn't owe the mob anymore. He owed me. And I was going to be a much harder collector. I was about to put the device away when a sound from the corner of the room made me freeze. It was a soft metallic scraping noise coming from the air vent near the window. I had forgotten that the old ductwork in this house was large enough for a child. Or a very small malnourished woman. The grate slowly lifted. 2 terrified eyes peered out from the darkness of the shaft. Maya, I whispered, crawling over to help her. She pulled herself up. Her movements were stiff and painful. She was covered in dust and cobwebs, her hands scraped and bleeding. She looked like a soldier climbing out of the trenches. Richard, she gasped, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. We have to go, now. I shushed her, pointing gently at the floor. They're downstairs. We can't use the hallway. You don't understand. She hissed, her eyes wide with panic. I heard them. I crawled through the vents from the storage room. I was over the kitchen. They aren't waiting for the van on Monday. My stomach dropped. What did you hear? Tiffany was on the phone with the facility. Maya said, her voice shaking. But Brandon was prepping a syringe. I heard him say we're too much of a risk. He said if you wake up tomorrow and talk to that lawyer again, the whole thing falls apart. She paused, swallowing hard, tears cutting paths through the dust on her face. He said the dementia story is good, but a heart attack is better, she whispered. He's coming up here tonight, Richard. He's going to overdose you on your heart medication. He wants you to go to sleep and never wake up. I stared at her. I had bought his debt. I had saved him from the mob. And in the exact same moment, he was downstairs mixing a cocktail of death for the man who taught him how to tie his shoes. The betrayal didn't hurt anymore. It had calcified into something hard and sharp. Tonight, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He's waiting for the guests to leave, Maya said. He said he wants to do it before midnight so the coroner thinks you died in your sleep. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:15. We had 45 minutes before my son walked through that door to kill me. I looked at the lamp I had grabbed earlier. I looked at the heavy brass base. It was a weapon, yes. But against 2 people, against the men desperate enough to kill, it wasn't enough. We aren't just leaving Maya, I said, standing up and helping her to her feet. We're going to welcome him. I went to the closet and pulled out the small safe I kept hidden under the floorboards. It wasn't the one Brandon knew about. This was the decoy safe. I spun the dial. Inside wasn't money, but a collection of chemical compounds I had kept from my days investigating industrial arsons. Magnesium shavings, potassium nitrate. Simple stuff really until you mix them. I turned to Maya. Can you run? She nodded, wiping her face. I can run. Good, because we're going to turn this bedroom into a kill box. Brandon wants a heart attack. I'm going to give him a shock he'll never forget. I started stripping the wires from the bedside lamp. I was no longer the old man. I wasn't even the auditor. I was the father who realized that the only way to save the son he loved was to destroy the son he had lost. Waiting is always the hardest part of combat. Any soldier will tell you that. It's not the gunfire or the explosions that break you. It's the silence before the breach. I sat huddled in the back of the cedar closet, breathing through my mouth to keep the sound quiet. The slats in the closet door gave me a narrow, fractured view of my bedroom. Beside me, Maya was curled into a tight ball, her hand clamped over her mouth to muffle her shivering. I could feel her terror radiating off her like heat. But my own fear had vanished. In its place was a cold, clinical detachment. I wasn't a father waiting for his son. I was a witness waiting for a criminal. I had arranged the bed carefully. I used the long sofa cushions and rolled them up in the duvet, shaping them to look like the body of a sleeping man. I placed my old wig, the one I used years ago for undercover surveillance, on the pillow facing away from the door. In the dim light, it looked exactly like me. I held my phone in my hand, the camera app open. The brightness turned all the way down. The red record button pulsed silently under my thumb. At 11:45, the doorknob turned. It was slow, agonizingly slow. The deadbolt clicked, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silent house. Brandon stepped into the room. He wasn't wearing his shoes. He moved in socks sliding across the carpet. He was wearing black leather gloves. My heart turned to stone in my chest. You don't wear leather gloves to check on your sick father. You wear them so you don't leave prints. In his right hand, he held it. A syringe filled with clear liquid. I zoomed in with the camera. My hand steadied thanks to the adrenaline flooding my system. I needed his face. I needed the jury to see his eyes. Brandon stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked at the lump under the covers. He took a deep breath, and I saw his shoulders tremble. For a second, just for a fraction of a second, I thought he might stop. I thought the boy I raised might break through the monster he had become. I prayed for it. I prayed he would drop the needle and fall to his knees. But he didn't. He steeled himself. He walked to the side of the bed where my head should have been. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. The microphone on my phone picked it up clearly. "It's better this way. You're tired. Just sleep." He raised the syringe and brought it down in a violent stabbing motion, sinking the needle through the duvet and deep into the pillow where my neck should have been. He pushed the plunger with his thumb, emptying the lethal dose of heart medication into the feathers. He held it there for a moment, waiting for a reaction, waiting for the convulsions, waiting for his father to die. When the figure didn't move, Brandon pulled the needle out. He stepped back, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his gloved hand. He looked at the bed one last time, an expression of pure relief washing over his face. He thought he was free. He thought he had just solved his $5 million problem. He slipped the syringe into his pocket and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. As soon as the latch clicked, I hit stop on the recording. The video saved to the cloud instantly. I had it. Premeditated attempted murder, captured in high definition. I turned to Maya. She was staring at the door, tears streaming silently down her face. She had just watched the man she once loved try to kill the man she called a father. "We move," I whispered. "Now, we don't go out the door. The hallway's too risky. He might be circling back, listening to the silence of death." We went to the floor grate. I had removed the cover earlier. It was a tight fit even for Maya. And for a man my size and age, it was going to be hell. But hell was better than the needle. I went first, sliding my legs into the dark, dusty shaft. My joints screamed in protest. The metal edges scraped my skin, tearing my shirt. I dropped down the laundry chute, bracing my legs against the sides to control the fall. I landed on a pile of dirty linens in the basement utility room. Maya followed, landing lightly beside me. The basement was freezing and smelled of damp earth. We moved quickly to the coal chute door. It was rusted shut. I grabbed a crowbar from the tool rack, my old tools, the ones Brandon hadn't pawned yet. I wedged it into the seal and pulled hard. The muscles in my back seized, screaming in pain, but I kept pushing. With a groan of rusted metal, the door popped open. The storm outside greeted us instantly. The rain was pouring down, cold and relentless. We crawled out into the mud of the side garden, the wind whipping our clothes. We were soaked to the bone in seconds. We didn't run to the street. Brandon would be watching the front gates. We ran toward the woods at the back of the property, slipping and sliding in the mud. I held Maya's hand, pulling her up when she stumbled. We were two ghosts moving through the storm, leaving the house of horrors behind. We walked for over a mile through the dense tree line until we hit the service road that connected to the highway. My chest was heaving, my heart hammering a dangerous rhythm, but I felt more alive than I had in 10 years. I flagged down a passing taxi, the driver looking skeptically at the two mud-covered figures waving frantically in the rain. I pulled a roll of $100 bills from my waterproof pocket, cash I had hidden in the safe along with the chemicals. I slapped 2 bills against the window. "Downtown!" I yelled over the wind. "No questions." The driver unlocked the doors. We collapsed into the back seat. Maya was shivering uncontrollably. I took off my jacket, soaked as it was, and wrapped it around her. "Where are we going?" she chattered. "To the police station." "No," I said, looking out the back window to make sure we weren't being followed. "Brandon expects the police. He has a narrative ready for them. He thinks I'm dead. If we go to the police tonight, he'll spin it. He'll say I had a mental breakdown and kidnapped you." "Then where?" "To the Grand Hotel," I said. Maya looked at me like I was crazy. "A hotel?" "Brandon is a snob, but he's also predictable," I explained. "He thinks I'm a cheap old man. He thinks if I ran, I'd go to a seedy motel or a shelter. He will never look for us in the presidential suite of the most expensive hotel in the city. And we need a fortress. That hotel has security cameras and privacy laws that not even Brandon can bribe." We arrived at the hotel looking like drowned rats. The doorman hesitated, blocking our path. I didn't cower. I straightened to my full height. I channeled the commanding presence of a Marine Corps officer and walked right up to the front desk. I slapped $500 on the marble counter. "Mr. Richard Vance," I announced, my voice booming through the quiet lobby. "I require the penthouse suite, and I require absolute discretion. If anyone calls asking for me, I am not here." The concierge looked at the cash, then at my eyes. He saw the steel there. He didn't ask about the blood. He typed quickly and handed me a key card. "Welcome, Mr. Vance." Once we were in the suite, safe behind electronic locks, I finally allowed myself to sit down. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window looking out at the city lights, waiting for the sun to rise. I was playing out the next moves in my head. Back at the mansion, the morning light was breaking. I imagined Brandon waking up. He probably slept poorly, haunted by what he had done. Or maybe he slept soundly, comforted by the thought of the inheritance. He would put on his robe. He would practice his grieving face in the mirror. My father passed away in his sleep. It was his heart. He would walk down the hall to the master bedroom. He would open the door expecting to find a cold, motionless body. He would walk to the bed, pull back the duvet. I smiled in the dark hotel room as I pictured the moment. He would see the pillows. He would see the wig. He would see the feathers wet with the poison he had injected. Panic would seize him. He would realize there was no body. There was no victim, which meant there was a witness. He would run. He wouldn't run to the police. He would run to the money, the only thing he cared about. He would run to his office. He would scramble to the wall safe, his hands shaking so badly he'd missed the combination twice. Finally, the door would swing open. He would reach for the durable power of attorney document. The document I had signed with my own pen. The document that gave him the keys to the kingdom. He would pull it out, ready to rush to the bank before I could freeze the accounts. But when he looked at the paper in the morning light, his scream would tear through the empty house. The paper was blank. The ink had faded. The signature had vanished. The X was empty. He was holding nothing but a worthless sheet of paper. I checked my watch. It was 8 a.m. The banks were opening. And I had one more call to make. Not to the police. Not yet. I picked up the hotel phone. I dialed the number for the lender who had sold me Brandon's debt. "It's time to collect," I said. The morning sun over the city was usually gray and muted. But from the penthouse suite of the Grand Hotel, it looked like cold steel. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window watching the city wake up beneath me. I hadn't slept. My adrenaline had been replaced by an icy, focused clarity. The kind of clarity I used to feel right before walking into a courtroom to testify against a cartel boss. I was no longer just a father. I was the architect of a demolition. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. It wasn't room service. I opened the door to find the cavalry. Sheriff Miller was standing there looking grim and tired, holding a secure briefcase. Beside him was Elena Ross, a federal prosecutor I had mentored 15 years ago when she was just a fresh law school grad. Now she was one of the most feared attorneys in the district. And behind them was Dr. Evans, who had cleaned Maya up and treated her wounds. They stepped into the suite in silence. This wasn't a social visit. This was a war council. We gathered around a large polished mahogany dining table. I laid it all out. The digital voice recorder, the photographs of the bank transfers, the fake obituary Brandon had printed, the disappearing ink pen, and finally, the video file from last night. I connected my phone to the hotel TV. I hit play. The room fell dead silent as they watched Brandon walk into my bedroom. They watched him raise the syringe. They watched him stab the pillow where my head should have been. They saw the relief wash over his face when he thought he had murdered his own father. Elena Ross let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a minute. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Richard," she said, her voice steady but tight. "This is a Class A felony. First-degree attempted murder, kidnapping, wire fraud, elder abuse. With the financial records you hacked, we have him on money laundering and embezzlement. I can have a tactical team at the mansion in 20 minutes. We can drag him out in handcuffs before he finishes his morning coffee." I looked at the screen at the frozen image of my son holding a weapon. "No," I said. Miller looked at me confused. "Richard, he tried to kill you. He's dangerous. We need to move." "If he's arrested now," I explained, walking back to the window, "he'll plead insanity. He'll claim it was a mercy killing because I was suffering from dementia. He's been prepping that narrative for months. He has witnesses' fake medical records and a lawyer who will spin this into a tragedy where he's the victim." I turned back to them. "I don't just want him arrested. I want him discredited. I want him destroyed in front of the very people he's trying to impress. I want the world to see him not as a tragic son, but as a monster." Elena tapped her pen on the table. "You want to do it at the party? Brandon is hosting an engagement gala tonight," I said. "He invited half the city. He invited his creditors. He thinks I'm dead. He thinks Maya is gone. He's going to stand on that stage and toast to his future. I want to be there when the glass shatters." Miller nodded slowly. He understood theater. He knew that sometimes justice needed an audience to be permanent. "All right," Miller said. "My deputies will be in unmarked cars on the perimeter. Elena will have the federal warrants ready. But Richard, you can't walk in there alone. He has security." I looked at Maya. She was sitting in the corner of the room wrapped in a plush hotel robe. She had been listening in silence, her eyes wide and haunted. "I won't be alone," I said. Just then, my burner phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Brandon. The audacity made me let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Dad, I don't know where you are or what delusional episode you're having. I filed a missing persons report for you, and I told the police you kidnapped a homeless woman. If you don't bring her back and turn yourself in, they will shoot on sight. Don't ruin my night. I have guests." He was bluffing. He hadn't called the police. If he had called the police, they'd be knocking down his door asking about the corpse he thought was in my bed. He was terrified. He was trying to flush me out. He needed the engagement party to happen so he could secure new investors or at least stall the creditors he thought were coming for. He didn't know the only creditor coming was me. I looked at Maya. She was still trembling slightly, pulling at a loose thread on the robe. "Maya," I said softly. She looked up. Her face was clean now, but the trauma was etched into every line. "Tonight, Brandon thinks he's celebrating his victory," I told her. "He thinks you're a ghost, and he thinks I'm a corpse. I need you to do something very difficult. I need you to walk into that house with me." She shrank back into the chair. "I can't," she whispered. "He'll hurt me again." "He can't hurt you," I said, walking over and kneeling beside her chair. "Because this time you aren't his victim. You're the evidence. And more importantly, you're the owner of the house." She blinked. "What?" I pulled a document from my jacket pocket. "While you were sleeping, I had Harrison, my estate lawyer, draft a deed transfer. I transferred the title of the estate to you, Maya, effective immediately. You aren't a guest. You're the landlord. And you're going to evict him." A spark appeared in her eyes. It was faint, but it was there. "But look at me," she said, touching her brutally chopped hair and the scars on her arms. I look like what he made me." I stood up and offered her my hand. "Then let's change that." We spent the afternoon not planning a raid, but planning a resurrection. I called a personal shopper from the city's most exclusive boutique. I told her I needed a dress. Not just a dress. I needed armor made of silk and velvet. When the stylist arrived, she brought racks of clothes. Maya stood in front of the mirror, hesitant. She tried on a black dress, but it looked too somber. She tried on a white one, but it looked too frail. Then she found it. It was a deep midnight blue gown with long lace sleeves that completely covered the scars on her arms. It had a high collar that hid the bruises on her collarbone. It was regal. It was commanding. When she stepped out of the dressing room, the stylist gasped. I felt a lump in my throat. She didn't look like the broken girl that pulled out of an air vent. She looked like a queen who had returned from exile to reclaim her throne. We hired a makeup artist to cover the shadows under her eyes. A hairstylist shaped her choppy hair into a sleek modern cut that looked intentional, not punitive. When she looked in the mirror, she touched her reflection. She didn't see the victim anymore. She saw the woman who had survived 5 years of hell. I put on my tuxedo. It was the one I wore to audit the governor's inauguration 10 years ago. It still fit perfectly. I pinned my military service badge to the lapel. It's time, I said. We took the elevator down to the lobby. The hotel staff stopped and stared. We didn't look like fugitives. We looked like royalty. A black stretch limousine was waiting at the curb. I had ordered it. Brendan loved ostentation, so we were going to arriving something he couldn't ignore. As we climbed into the back of the car, the rain started again. It was fitting. The sky was weeping for what was about to happen. The drive to the mansion took 40 minutes. Neither of us spoke. I held Maya's hand. Her grip was strong, now she wasn't shaking. Turning onto the private road that led to my estate, I saw the lights. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Cars lined the long driveway, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys. The city's elite were there drinking my wine, standing on my lawn, celebrating with the man who had tried to murder me. The security guard at the gate was new. He didn't recognize me. He stepped out of his booth holding a clipboard. Name? He asked, peering through the tinted window. I rolled the window down just enough for him to see my eyes. Vance, I said. He checked his list. Brendan Vance is inside. Sir, are you a relative? I'm the owner, I said. Open the gate. He hesitated, feeling the authority in my voice, and pressed the button. The iron gate swung open. We rolled up the driveway, the gravel crunching under the heavy tires. We stopped right in front of the main entrance. I could hear the music. It was a string quartet playing Mozart. It was civilized. It was polite. It was a lie. I looked at Maya. Are you ready? I asked. She took a deep breath. She touched the necklace I had bought her to replace the one Brandon stole. Let's take my house back, she said. The driver opened the door. I stepped out first, adjusting my cufflinks. I reached a hand bag for her. Maya stepped out into the rain, the midnight blue dress flowing around her like water. We walked up the steps. The front doors were open. Inside, I could see Brandon standing on the grand staircase, a glass of champagne in his hand. Tiffany clinging to his arm. He was laughing. He looked like a king. He had no idea the executioner had just walked through the door. The grand hall of my estate had been transformed into a palace of lies. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the assembled guests, the elite of society standing shoulder to shoulder, holding glasses of vintage champagne. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the soft, polite murmur of conversation masking the rot that lay beneath the foundation. From the shadows of the foyer, I watched them. I saw bankers I had known for decades, politicians I had supported, and neighbors who had looked the other way when my son began his reign of terror. They were all there to witness the coronation of Brendan Vance, the devoted son who had sadly been forced to take over the family empire due to his father's tragic decline. Brendan was on the raised platform at the far end of the room, positioned in front of the massive projection screen that was currently looping photos of the estate grounds. He looked every inch the grieving but capable heir. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, his hair slicked back, his smile practiced and somber. Tiffany was at his side, gripping his arm with the adoration of a woman who believes she just won the lottery. She was wearing a white gown that shimmered under the lights, a symbol of purity that was as fraudulent as the diamond on her finger. Brandon raised a hand and the room fell silent. The string quartet lowered their bows. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice trembling with an emotion I knew was entirely manufactured. Thank you all for coming tonight. He began looking out over the crowd with watery eyes. As many of you know, this has been a difficult week for our family. My father, Richard, has been struggling with his health for some time. It breaks my heart to announce that his condition has deteriorated rapidly over the last few days. For his own safety and dignity, we made the difficult decision to move him to a specialized facility where he can receive the constant care he needs. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. Someone in the front row dabbed their eyes with a tissue. It was a masterclass in manipulation. It was my father's wish. Brandon continued, his voice gaining strength, that the management of the Vance estate passed to me immediately so he could rest without the burden of the business. And so, tonight isn't just an engagement party for Tiffany and me. It's a celebration of Richard's legacy, a legacy I promise to honor and protect with my life. He raised his glass. To Richard Vance, may he find peace. To Richard! The crowd echoed, raising their glasses in a toast to a man they thought was practically dead. I looked at Maya. She was standing beside me in the shadows, her hand gripping mine. In her midnight blue dress, with her head held high, she didn't look like a victim. She looked like a Valkyrie. Now, I whispered. I signaled the 2 catering staff members I had bribed at the service entrance. They threw open the massive double doors of the grand hall. The sound of the heavy oak doors slamming against the walls cracked like thunder cutting through the polite atmosphere. Heads turned. Glasses were lowered. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. We stepped into the light. I didn't use a cane. I didn't shuffle my feet. I walked with the stride of a man who had marched onto battlefields far more dangerous than a cocktail party. Beside me, Maya matched my pace, her eyes locked on the man who had stolen 5 years of her life. We walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting before us like the Red Sea. I saw jaws drop. I saw the color drain from the faces of the bankers who had processed Brandon's fraudulent transfers. They were looking at a ghost. And that ghost looked very much alive and very angry. Brandon dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the stage, the sound amplified by the microphone. A sharp crack that made Tiffany jump. She stared at us, her mouth opening and closing. Her perfect composure fracturing into pure terror. Brandon recovered first. His survival instinct, honed by years of lying, kicked in. He let out a laugh, a nervous, high-pitched sound that hurt the ears. "Dad!" he yelled into the microphone, his voice tight. "Oh my God, look, everyone, he got out!" He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Please stand back!" he shouted to the crowd, creating a perimeter of fear. "He's having an episode. He's confused and violent. Security. Where is security? Grab him before he hurts himself." 2 hired guards started moving toward us from the perimeter, unsure of what to do. I didn't stop walking. I reached into the pocket of my tuxedo and pulled out not a gun, but a sleek little remote control. I had installed the audio-visual system in this house myself 10 years ago. I knew the override codes. Brandon thought he controlled the room, but he was just a guest in my theater. I pressed the button. The microphone on the stand in front of Brandon cut out with a screech of feedback. The string quartet stopped playing. The lights in the hall dimmed, plunging the audience into gloom, leaving only the massive projection screen behind Brandon illuminated. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I looked up at my son. I didn't need a microphone. My voice, trained in courtrooms and boot camps, reached every corner of the room. "I am not confused, Brandon," I said, my voice cold and hard as granite. "And I am certainly not retired." "Dad, stop this!" Brandon shrieked, his voice thin without amplification. "You're sick! You're senile!" "Ladies and gentlemen, please ignore him. He doesn't know what he's saying." I pressed the second button on the remote. The slideshow of the estate vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared on the 20-foot screen. It was magnified, the numbers crisp and damning. "This," I announced to the room, pointing at the screen, "is the ledger for the Serenity Foundation, the shell company my son used to embezzle $3 million from the family trust." Gasps erupted from the crowd. I saw the bank manager in the front row squinting at the screen, recognizing the routing numbers. Brandon turned to look at the screen, his face pale. "That's a lie," he shrieked. "He wrote that himself. It's fake." I pressed the next button. The screen changed again. This time it wasn't a document. It was a video file. It was grainy, taken from a hidden camera in a study, but the audio was crystal clear. It was the recording I had made yesterday through the intercom. Tiffany's voice boomed through the speakers, loud and distorted, but undeniable. "We need to move him tonight to Green Valley. Once we have the signature, the ambulance takes Richard to the facility. By the time he wakes up, you'll be in a locked ward with no phone. We sell the house to pay your debts, and we disappear. The crowd turned as one to look at Tiffany. She shrank back against the projection screen, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. No, she whimpered. That's taken out of context. I pressed the final button. This is the one that ends it, I said. The screen went black for a second, then flickered to life with the night vision footage from my bedroom. The timestamp in the corner read 11:45 p.m. the night before. The room watched in horrified silence as Brendan crept into the frame. They saw the gloves. They saw the syringe. They saw him pause over the sleeping figure in the bed. They saw him raise the needle and stab it into the pillow with a force that made the audience jump. They heard his whisper amplified to a deafening volume. Just sleep. A woman in the back screamed. The silence broke. The room erupted into chaos. Brandon stared at the screen, watching himself commit attempted murder. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with the realization that he had fallen into a trap so deep he would never crawl out. It was a wig, I said simply. Brandon made a sound like a wounded animal. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of the people he wanted to impress, and saw only repulsion. He looked toward the exit, but the path was blocked by his own guests. He lunged. He didn't come for me. He went for the remote. He jumped off the stage, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Give it to me," he screamed. "Give it to me, you old bastard." He never reached me. Before he could take 3 steps, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. It was Sheriff Miller, flanked by 2 federal agents. Miller didn't hesitate. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had been waiting all night for this moment. He tackled Brandon mid-stride, slamming him into the marble floor with a bone-rattling thud. Brandon twisted and kicked screaming obscenities, but the agents were on him instantly. I watched them pull his arms behind his back. I heard the metallic click of the handcuffs, a sound sweeter than any symphony. "Let me go!" Brandon screamed, spitting blood from a split lip. "I'm Brandon Vance. I own this house. I have power of attorney." Elena Ross, the federal prosecutor, stepped forward, holding the blank piece of paper I had retrieved from the safe earlier. The one Brandon thought was signed. "You have nothing, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice cutting through his screams. "The document is blank. You have no rights, you have no property, and as of this moment, you have no freedom. You are under arrest for attempted murder, wire fraud, and kidnapping." Tiffany tried to run for the back exit, kicking off her heels to sprint faster, but the doors swung open and 2 female officers were waiting for her. They caught her by the arms as she tried to claw her way past. I stood over my son as they pulled him to his feet. His tuxedo was torn, his face was bruised, and his dignity was gone. He looked at me breathing heavily, his eyes searching for some fragment of the father who used to bail him out. "Dad," he begged, his voice cracking, shifting instantly from rage to pleading. "Dad, please." "It was a mistake. I was in debt. They were going to kill me. You have to help me. I'm your son." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had locked Maya in a cage for 5 years. I looked at the man who had tried to stop my heart with a needle. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. "I know about the debt, Brandon." His eyes went wide. "I bought it," I whispered. "I am Apex Investments. See, right now I own your debt, and I own you. You aren't going to a minimum security prison for white-collar criminals. You are going to be insolvent, and when you get out in 20 years, you won't have a dime to your name." Brandon's knees buckled. He realized then that I hadn't just beaten him. I had erased him. "Sheriff, take him away," I said. As they dragged him out of the hall, screaming my name, the guests parted again, looking at me with a mix of fear and awe. I turned to Maya. She was crying, but they were tears of liberation. She walked up to the microphone Brandon had abandoned. She looked out at the silent, stunned crowd. She touched the scars on her arm. Then she looked directly into the camera I had set up to stream the event. "The party is over," she said. "Get out of my house." The silence that falls after the sirens fade is heavy, but for the first time in 5 years, it was a silence I welcomed. The engagement party ended not with a toast, but with the harsh reality of federal indictments. as the guests fled into the rainy night, trying to distance themselves from the scandal. I didn't go to bed. I went to work. Brandon Vance's audit was over, and now it was time for the liquidation. The legal process was swift and brutal. Because I had bought Brandon's debt from the holding company, I wasn't just a victim of his crimes. I was his primary creditor. This gave me a power the district attorney didn't have. While the state built its case for attempted murder and kidnapping, I initiated the immediate seizure of his assets to satisfy the loan. I watched as the repo trucks rolled up the driveway the next morning. They took the Porsche he loved more than his family. They took the Italian suits he used to impress strangers. They took the watch he bought with the money he stole from the family trust. I stripped him of every material possession he had used to build his fake identity. Tiffany didn't fare any better. She tried to cut a deal with the prosecutor offering to testify against Brandon in exchange for immunity. She claimed she was coerced, a victim of Brandon's manipulation. But she forgot I had the recordings. I handed over the audio files where she calmly discussed the dose of heart medication needed to kill me. The jury wouldn't hear a victim. They would hear a willing accomplice to murder and false imprisonment. The diamond ring she fought so hard to keep was entered into evidence. A cold piece of carbon that cost her her freedom. 3 weeks later, I went to the county detention center. I didn't have to go. My lawyer Harrison advised me against it. He said there was nothing left to say. But I needed to close the ledger. I needed to see the final balance. The visiting room was cold, smelling of industrial cleaner and desperation. I sat on the metal stool, my hands folded on the stainless steel counter. When the guards brought Brandon in, I barely recognized him. The arrogance was gone, scrubbed away by the reality of an 8x10 cell. He looked smaller. His hair was unkempt, his skin pale. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He sat down, avoiding my eyes at first, but then desperation forced him to look at me. "Dad?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Thank God you came. You have to get me out of here. The public defender is an idiot. He says I'm looking at 20 years. 20 years, Dad. I'll be an old man when I get out." I looked at him through the thick glass. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hatred. I just felt a deep, hollow sadness. "You committed a crime, Brandon," I said, my voice quiet. "You kidnapped a woman. You stole millions. You tried to kill your father. 20 years is a gift. It should be life." He slammed his hand against the glass, making the guard step forward. "It was a mistake," he hissed, his eyes wild. "I was drowning. I did what I had to do to survive." "You have money, Dad. You have millions hidden away. Just pay the lawyers. Buy the judge. You can fix this. We can start over. I'll go to rehab. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me here." I watched him plead, negotiating with a currency he didn't have. He still didn't understand. He thought this was a transaction. He thought love was something you could leverage, and justice was something you could buy. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photograph. It wasn't the one he burned. It was a copy of it restored from a digital file. It was Catherine and me on that cruise, smiling happily. I held it up to the glass. "Do you remember what your mother used to say about you?" I asked. Brandon blinked, confused by the shifting conversation. "What? Who cares what she said? She's dead." "She used to say you had a good heart." I continued, ignoring him. "She used to say that if we raised you right, if we gave you every opportunity, you would do great things. We gave you the best schools, the best cars, the best life." I lowered the photo. I spent my whole life auditing companies, Brandon. I looked for the rot in the system, but I never audited my own home. I thought if I gave you money, I was giving you love. I thought if I shielded you from consequences, I was protecting you. I leaned closer to the glass. I was wrong. I taught you how to count money, Brandon. I taught you how to value things, but I forgot to teach you how to value people. I forgot to teach you how to be a human being, and that is my failure just as much as it is yours. Brandon's face crumpled. "Dad, please. I'm your son. Blood is thicker than water." I stood up. My knees popped a reminder of my age, but I felt lighter than I had in years. "You're right," I said. "Blood is thicker than water, but it's not thicker than ink. And the ink on your ledger is dry. This is the final lesson, Brandon. You are insolvent. You are bankrupt in every way a man can be." I turned to walk away. "Dad!" he screamed, pounding his fists against the glass. "You can't leave me here. I have nothing. I'm a nobody. I didn't look back. I walked out of the visiting room, down the long hallway, and into the fresh air. I left my son in the cage he had built for himself. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I knew that if I turned around, it would kill us both. It's been 6 months since that day. The seasons have changed. The city rain has softened into a spring mist. I'm sitting on the back porch of the estate with a cup of coffee in my hand. The house is quiet now, but it isn't empty. The ghosts are gone. I look out at the garden. Maya is there. She's kneeling in the dirt, planting hydrangeas. She's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her arms bare. The scars are still there, faint white lines against her skin, but she doesn't hide them anymore. She calls them her battle stripes. She stands up and waves at me, a bright, genuine smile lighting up her face. She looks healthy. The shadows under her eyes are gone. She walks up the steps and sits beside me. "How was the meeting?" I ask. "It was amazing," she says, her eyes shining. "We got the grant. The city approved the permit. We open next month." Maya isn't just living here. She's building something. She took the money I recovered from the shell accounts, the money Brandon tried to steal, and started a foundation. She calls it the Phoenix Center. It's a safe house and legal aid clinic for women who have been victims of financial and domestic abuse. She's using her trauma to heal others. She's doing what I should have done years ago. She reaches over and takes my hand. Her grip is warm and strong. "Thank you, Richard," she says, "for everything." I look at her. I look at this woman who shares no DNA with me, who was brought into my life by a lie, but who stayed because of the truth. I reach into my pocket and pull out the gold signet ring, the Vance family crest, the one Brandon used to covet, the one Maya recognized in the police station when she thought I was dead. I take her hand and press the ring into her palm. "It's too big for you," I say, my voice thick with emotion. "You might have to wear it on a chain, but it belongs to you." Maya stares at the heavy gold ring. "Richard, I can't. This is for your heir." "You are my heir, Maya," I say firmly. Family isn't about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who bleeds for you. It's about who stands by you when the house is burning down. Brandon was my son by biology, but he was a stranger to my heart. You're the daughter Catherine and I never had. She closes her fingers around the ring, leans over, and rests her head on my shoulder. We sit there for a long time watching the sun break through the clouds. I lost a son. That's a pain that will never completely go away. I wake up some nights thinking about the little boy who used to ask me to check under his bed for monsters, wondering when he became the monster himself. But then I look at the woman sitting beside me. I look at the work she's doing. I look at the peace we've built in this house. God has a strange way of balancing the books. He took the boy I raised, but he gave me back the angel I needed. I survived the audit. I survived the betrayal. And for the first time in a long time, the numbers add up. I turn to look at you, the listener. You've heard my story. You've walked through the rain and the fire with me. Some of you might think I was too hard on Brandon. Some might think a father should forgive anything, that I should have used my wealth to shield him from the consequences of his actions. Maybe you're right. Or maybe mercy without justice is just another form of neglect. I want to know what you think. Was I too cruel? Or did I finally give my son the only thing that could save his soul? Accountability. Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if this story touched you, if it made you hold your loved ones a little tighter or question the people you trust, please hit the like button and subscribe. It helps me share this truth with others. Until next time, remember, check your accounts, trust your gut, and never, ever sign a document you haven't read.